I'm going to draw my presentation for you rather than have slides. I'm going to lower the bar in that my drawing is not brilliant. I just think we all see quite a lot of slides. So set your expectations there. So as Marion said, my name's Helen Tupper. I'm the co-founder of a business called Amazing If. Our mission at Amazing If is to make work better for everyone. It's quite a big mission. My mission here today is to enlist you in helping me to make work better for everybody. I'm particularly going to focus on something called growth mindset. Just a quick show of hands. Has anyone come across growth mindset as a concept before? Amazing, brilliant. I'd say about half the room have come across that, which is fantastic. One more question for you. There is going to be a bit of interaction in this. So who in the room is a manager, just so I can get a read? Okay. So I would say, 80% of the room are managers. Half of you have heard of growth mindset, which is brilliant, because today we're going to talk about growth mindset management. So I'm in the right room with the right people. So this making work better for everyone thing and growth mindset. So the person who is behind a lot of the work on growth mindset is somebody called Carol Dweck. And she talks about two different kinds of mindset. She talks about growth mindset, which we will think of as being super spongy. That is a sponge. And she also talks about something called fixed mindset, which I think of being like almost like a rock, slightly impenetrable. So what does this look and sound like at work? Somebody with growth mindset at work is somebody who will put themselves into situations that might be quite challenging. So they're willing to step outside of their comfort zone because they realize that even though there's some risk in doing that, that is where they are most likely to learn and grow and develop. Somebody who has growth mindset is more likely to welcome feedback, both in terms of giving it to other people and getting it for themselves. Because even though that feels really uncomfortable, and we'll talk about some of the neuroscience about why that feels hard, they know that that is how they will learn, grow, and develop. They see their intellect, their talents as something that can be developed. Now, conversely, fixed mindset is more like the perception that you've either got it or you haven't. You either know it or you don't. Fixed mindset sees intelligence as sort of like a finite thing. Someone with fixed mindset is quite often driven by either fear of being found out, so they're not going to proactively put themselves into a situation where they might fail, because if I've got fixed mindset, I don't want you to think that I don't know what I'm doing. Equally, they might not proactively ask for feedback, because I don't want to put in your mind that I might be able to do something a bit better. Or, as someone with fixed mindset, I might be questioning, well, why do you know more than me? Why would I ask feedback from somebody who works for me? Because I'm more senior, I know more than that person. So fixed mindset and growth mindset are really important in the context of work, because I talk a lot about squiggly careers, which is the careers that most of us are in now. They're much more changeable, they're much more unpredictable, there's much more movement, there's a lot less control. And in that situation where we're not quite sure maybe what job we're going to do next, or where we're going to work, or who we're going to work for, some of the jobs that we're going to do don't even exist yet, in that context of our careers, growth mindset is far more helpful. Fixed mindset makes us quite vulnerable, because it means that we're not proactively learning and developing and almost preempting the opportunities that we're going to have in the future. So the first thing I kind of want to really land, and the people that maybe already know about fixed and growth mindset will probably already be there, is that growth mindset is key for our careers. Now, I just want to go back to the management thing a minute. So whether or not you're a manager, there's some people in the room that might not be managers yet. We've all been managed. I would like you to get in your mind your best manager in your career. Might be the person you're sitting next to now, if you've come with your manager today, who knows. We'll talk about the worst ones as well. Don't look next to them when I say that. But think about your best manager that you've had in your career, okay? You've got them in your mind. And a little bit of audience participation. Can you shout at me some words? Why were they your best manager? What was that brilliant manager doing? They were supportive. Great, thank you. Always be brave to kick off. Challenging. Did I hear trust as well? Thank you. They were available. They gave you time. Thought you were worthy of time. Encouraging, empowering. Okay, one more. Probably got space for one more. What else is the good manager doing? They're aspirational. Okay. Aspirational and be inspirational. Now, let's think about the ones that didn't leave you feeling quite so great at the end of the day. So the ones that might be more difficult, let's put them in the sort of category of the bad manager. Some of you maybe haven't had any of those, which is fantastic. Some of you might have had more than one. Just think about one. Think about one manager that didn't make you feel your best at work, okay? We're not going to name them. What was that manager doing or not doing? Sorry? Oh yeah, micromanaging. Gosh. Yeah. Manage, negative, disinterested. Yeah. Patronizing, gosh. What else? I mean, you can just vent, it's fine, we'll get this out. It's like therapy. Anything else? Too busy, yeah, not making time for you. Anything else? Aggressive, bully, gosh, isn't it bad? But it's the reality. So let's just take a step back a second. Good managers that we have experienced are, they trust, they're empowering, they're encouraging, they're available to us, they're supporting, they're aspirational, they're somebody, they're role models for us. Bad managers are disinterested, critical, patronizing, negative, aggressive, too busy, and occasionally bullying. Like, it's not good. We obviously want to be more like these people. A lot of these traits, trusting people, developing them, empowering them, are linked to growth mindset. So I'm going to put these positive things into the concept of growth mindset. I'm going to talk about how do you become a growth mindset manager that engenders all of that good stuff. Because management, majority in the room of you are managers, management is not just a role, it is a responsibility. We, as managers, have the ability to help people grow and develop in their careers, to go home at the end of the day and feel like they have done a good job, to feel good about themselves and their contribution, and to support their mental health. It is much, much more than just a job description. It is a huge responsibility, and we want to do whatever we can so that we are helping people to feel much, much more like that. But it's not easy. Same as you, been a manager for quite a long time. It is not an easy thing. And there are other things that we are managing, right? So we are managing our time, we are managing our workload, we are managing our own development, we are probably managing lots of stakeholders who we've got to keep happy and keep updated and all the other stuff we have to do in our job. Oh, and we're managing people. So I just want to get a bit of a read of the room. I would like to understand, honestly, how much time, when we think about managing people, developing people, one-to-ones, giving them clear direction, doing all of this brilliant stuff here, what percentage of your time do you think you spend doing that? So when I say the percentage that feels about right, no one is taking a picture and reporting this back to your team, put your hand up. So who spends 100% of their time managing the people that they work for versus all the other things? 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%, 50% managing people, 40%, 30%, 20%, 10%. Okay, so vast majority of people in the room, somewhere between about 20 and 60%, I think. So a third to half of your time is being spent managing people in your team. And that's not bad, that's the reality. Most people do other things than just managing people. But what it does mean is that it's not easy to do all of this brilliant stuff with the actual time available to us to do it. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we can become growth mindset managers, but some relatively simple, practical things we can do so that we can engender more of that feeling and far, far less of this. That is my aim, and that's how I'm going to enlist you into making work better for everyone. The first thing I want to talk about is something called psychological safety. It's a principle that has been really popularized quite recently by someone called Amy Edmondson. Show of hands, anyone that's kind of familiar with psychological safety? Okay, so only a couple of people. It's really, really powerful stuff. Amy Edmondson has worked with Google on something called Project Aristotle. Well worth a look. I'll give you some pointers to where you can find some information about it. But what she has proven in her research is that psychological safety is the number one thing that differentiates average teams from high-performing teams. And psychological safety is basically people in your team feeling like they can come to work, they can be themselves, they can make mistakes, and there isn't any threat or retaliation. So they can show up as who they are and be themselves at work. And she has identified 7 characteristics of teams that are psychologically safe, and that's what I want to talk through with you today. Now, this is something that you can go back and work on with your teams. I will show you a link to a survey that you can do with your teams so that you can get a steer of how psychologically safe your teams feel today. But for yourselves now, it's worth thinking about these 7 dimensions. If you were to guess what your team would say about how present these are in your work today, what do you think? So the first one, psychologically safe teams, the first thing that Amy Edmondson says is that it is okay to make mistakes. So if you were thinking of your team, if you were to ask them, would you from strongly agree to strongly disagree, if we were going to use a very typical 5-point scale, what do you think they would say about how safe they feel in your teams to make mistakes? We don't have to shout it out. The next one is about uniqueness. Do people in your team feel like they can show up as their unique selves? Or do they feel they have to put on some kind of persona? I've definitely worked in organisations where I've felt that I've had to sort of mould or shape myself and my behaviour in order to fit the culture. What would your team say about that? Do they have to change, or can they show up as their true selves at work? The third one's about asking for help. Are people in your team comfortable asking for help from you, from each other, or is there something going on where that is seen as like a sign of weakness, a sign of people not knowing enough? The fourth one is tough conversations. When we do psychological safety with organisations, we find this to be one of the trickiest things. Everyone's so nice. Everyone's so nice and polite, and people really, really worry about having a tough conversation. So lots of these issues sort of simmer under the surface because people think they worry about the impact of talking about them. What would your team say? Do they feel comfortable having tough conversations, or do they think people shy away from them? The next one over here, number 5, is about attitude to risk. What's the attitude to risk in your team? Are people scared of it? Do they feel like you're giving them enough space? Maybe you're micromanaging them, and it might not be your intent, but maybe that's how they're feeling your management style, and they don't feel comfortable taking risks. The next one here is about support. Do your team feel supported, or do they feel that there's a threat of being undermined, like someone's going to drop the bomb? And that might not be just because of you. There could be other people in the team that might be creating an environment that doesn't feel psychologically safe for them. And the last one over here is about strengths. Do your team know their individual strengths? Are your team aware of the collective strengths in the team? And do they feel that they're being utilised? I mean, that's quite a big ask. Do they know them? Do you know each other's? And are they being utilised? That is what it takes to create a psychologically safe team. And when you have that, people feel like they can be themselves at work and they can do their best work at work. But it's quite big. I mean, I've covered 7 really, really chunky areas. So for this first point, how do you make it practical and actionable? First things first, I would suggest that you ask your team how they feel on those 7 dimensions. You can either do it in conversation, in a team meeting, or sometimes with organisations we send them a survey and we create it on Typeform and we send it and they get anonymous feedback about maybe what's working well at the moment and where they might want to focus. So it depends on what your team is like. Send a survey, have a conversation, but somehow get a bit of a temperature check of what's working well at the moment and where you might want to focus some attention. Now, if there are 3 things that you could do that would make quite a big difference quite quickly in terms of psychological safety, the first one is the piece around strengths that I mentioned. So individuals knowing what they're good at and teams knowing what they're good at. A couple of things that you can do. There are loads of free tools to help you with this. So there's one called viacharacterstrengths.org. It's a website. All your team can complete it. They can share what their top strengths are, and then you can have that conversation with each other. You can use things like StrengthsFinder, which might cost you a little bit more. That would cost you about £15 per person in your team. There's lots of tools. We go into organisations and do strength stuff with them. The important thing is whether you use a free tool or you use a paid tool, Google them, you will find lots of them, that you have a conversation in the team about what are people, we call it super strengths, what are people's super strengths, to what extent are they using them at work. Some organisations we work with create team strengths matrices, so you can see, have we got really similar strengths in teams? The next time we recruit people, might we want to prioritise some strengths gaps that we've got? The next time we have projects coming into the team, let's not just give it to the person who happens to be free, let's give it to the person whose strengths align with that project. But start with doing some kind of strengths assessment, having a conversation about people's strengths. The next thing is about you, and it is about being vulnerable and about role modelling. The lady over there, you talked about being aspirational to people. Loads of research, Brené Brown's done a lot of work on this, about you as a manager being vulnerable and authentic is one of the most simple ways. I mean, it's hard for you to do, but it's one of the most simple ways of people feeling like it's safe at work. And it might start with you saying sorry, because you might get some of that feedback back when you do your psychological safety assessment, and you might say, people might come back and say, oh, it didn't feel safe here to make a mistake, or I don't feel comfortable being myself here. And you might need to say, I didn't know that was going on. I am sorry for my role in continuing with this behavior. I intend to change it. You might need to share some mistakes you have made, but if you are a role model and you can show to other people that it is okay to make mistakes, it's important to be authentic, it's okay to say sorry, it's not failure, it's honesty, then you can start to create that behavior in other people. And the last thing is about mistakes. It's quite a simple thing, and it's quite what a lot of organisations that we work with have started to do. They fit somewhere into their meeting schedule. You all probably have lots of meetings, but mistake meetings. So organisations that we've worked with that have adopted this, Uber, Money Supermarket, just some of the companies that do this. And what they will do is, in a monthly meeting, some of them even have like a dedicated meeting, they will talk about the mistakes that have happened, and it's not to mock people or give them a wooden spoon. It is to say what happened, how did it happen, what can we learn from it, what would we do differently. So they create a completely safe space to talk about things that have basically gone wrong. And it's not to encourage many more things to go wrong, but it's to make sure that it doesn't get hidden. Because when it gets hidden, we don't solve the problems and we don't learn from them. So that's the first principle I want to talk about, psychological safety. The next one is, actually, let me just point to some of these. If you want to dig into this a little bit more, I've kind of told you a few tools. Amy Edmondson has a great TED Talk. She also has a really good resource about why psychological safety is important in the knowledge economy, which is basically the work we all do is generally more reliant on our brains than it is us standing and kind of churning stuff out. So she talks about if people don't feel safe to share what's in their brains, then we're basically not capturing the value that most people have in a knowledge economy. It's a really good video. If you go to Google's Rework site, they have a whole load of tools, the assessment that I mentioned, exercises that you can run in your team so that you can start to do some things around psychological safety. Google's Rework's very, very useful. So the next thing I want to talk about is feedback. Let's just do a quick show of hands. Who sometimes feels uncomfortable about giving people feedback? Okay. I'd say that's probably about two-thirds of the room. Sometimes, I would put my hand up, put 2 hands up for that. Sometimes feels uncomfortable. Do you know what? The people that are receiving feedback from you, they feel uncomfortable too. When you get into the neuroscience of it, our brains actually over-process negative feedback. It is like Velcro. Our brains are like, if I give you positive feedback, the research says you have to talk about positive feedback for 6 seconds before someone identifies with it. Whereas if you give me some negative feedback, I instantly identify with it and start processing it. So it's almost like the positive stuff, great job, Helen, well done, Helen, that just bounces off us. If you say, oh, not so good today, Helen, I've instantly internalized that and started processing it. It's the way our brains work, unfortunately. And that makes feedback a very emotionally laden process, potentially for you giving it because you're seeing someone's reaction and their defensiveness, and definitely for them receiving it. It's just not particularly comfortable for us. Because of that, and there are definitely things that you can do to counteract it and sort of hack the brain a little bit, but because of that, it's worth knowing that you're going to go into a situation that you may find awkward, and the person receiving it also is not going to love either. Because of that, we tend to not do it as frequently as we should. Maybe we do it on a quarterly basis, maybe we just do it on an annual basis. So people aren't kind of building a feedback muscle. They're doing it infrequently, and it's feeling pretty awkward when we do it. What we need to do is just get better at feedback, and I'm going to talk about 3 things that you can do. Just one side point, I used to work for Microsoft. Anyone work for Microsoft here? It's a shame, I love Microsoft. But I used to work for Microsoft, and what they did was they reframed the word feedback. Because it is so emotionally laden, they called it perspectives. So instead of let's have a feedback session, they would say let's have a perspective session. Just because as a word, it had become so bogged down in emotion about what people thought about it, that just changing some of the processes and tools and language made people start to think slightly differently about it. So I'm always fascinated by the role of language, but I want to get into like actionable stuff with you. I could talk to you about language all day. There are 3 R's that can help you to improve how we are doing feedback in businesses, both managers, and don't forget, this isn't all on you. We want to encourage your team to be doing some of this stuff too. So the first thing is about regular. We want to make feedback in our business happen as regularly as possible. Definitely not quarterly, definitely not annually. This needs to be happening daily and weekly. But some of the tools that we have for feedback, a bit clunky sometimes, a bit long-winded, they don't really help us to do feedback regularly. The most simple feedback tool that I use, and I use it in my business now, I've used it in the past couple of organizations that I've worked with, is something called what worked well, even better if. It is deceptively simple. It is just this. What worked well, this is how I write it to remember it, even better if. You can use it in so many situations. I would use it in team meetings. I would say, guys, this team meeting today, what was one thing that you thought well, what's one thing you thought would be even better if for next time? If I was walking from one meeting to another, because that was generally my corporate life, one meeting to another, and I was walking with someone from my team, I would ask them, in that meeting today, what do you think I did well? Is there anything you think I could do even better if before we go into our next meeting? I would give my team feedback in that way in their one-to-ones. It is such a simple way, and it starts with you. So as a manager, you know I talked about role modeling. Start asking your team for feedback in this way. It's a lot easier for them to give you feedback in this way because it can be short. I've done it over WhatsApp, I've done it over IM, I've done it over email. The more you do it and ask for it, the more it will role model your team starting to ask for it too. You can do it in lots of different ways. You just want to make this much more frequent in your business. I talked about Money Supermarket. So I did a big career development program with Money Supermarket. Anyone work at Money Supermarket? Also another brilliant business. Trained about 500 people over 4.5 months at Money Supermarket on different career development things that we do. And I got 500 pieces of even better if feedback in 4 months. I mean, that's about as regular as you can get. What it helped me to do was become far less sensitive, and it wasn't all great, far less sensitive to the even better if feedback. So now I'm much more open to getting it. You need to create that in your teams for yourself and for the people that work for you. Feedback shouldn't be something that we should fear. It should be something that we should embrace as part of growth mindset. The next thing is real time. This is an easy one. As close to the moment that you want to give feedback on, the meeting, the conversation, the presentation, whatever it is, as close to that moment, give the person that feedback. Very often, the reason that we create a gap in between the instance and the delivery of the feedback is on us. It's because of how we feel about the feedback. And sometimes we make sort of excuses, oh, it's better in person when I've got my one-to-one with them next week, or they've got a lot going on at the moment, maybe I shouldn't give this to them right now. The longer you leave it, the less resonant it is for that individual, and also the less time you're giving them to work on it and to react to it. So don't make that about you. Try and give them the feedback as close to the moment, as regularly as possible to help those people to be their best at work. I really struggled with, does anyone come across radical candor? So if you do struggle with feedback, I don't always find it easy, definitely not. I really found Kim Scott's work on radical candor really, really useful. She talks about we exist on these dimensions of whether we challenge directly or indirectly and care personally or basically don't care about people. And I challenged indirectly and cared a lot. So it meant that I was I wasn't giving people really good feedback. I think it's called manipulative insincerity. I mean, it's dreadful, isn't it? Because basically, I was being too nice and not very direct because I thought that was better for the individual. It wasn't. It was better for me. It made me feel good. I wasn't helping them at all. She talks about this radical candor as being the feedback style that helps people to develop the most. That is when you care about them, but you challenge directly. It's really, really important. It's a good thing to look at if you, as an individual, struggle with it. This last thing down here is about making it relevant. You want the feedback to be as relevant to the person as possible. Now, there's 2 ways that you make it relevant. The first is that you don't just say, oh, that could have been better, Helen, or good job. It's not really helping me. Particularly, remember the neuroscience, the good job, well done, great effort. They dismiss that. They're listening for the negative. We've got to talk for at least 6 seconds about what someone did well. Great presentation today. I thought it was really useful how you engaged the people, you captured their attention, and you answered the questions really, really cleanly. Talk for 6 seconds, I've been specific. So that's one way you can make it relevant for someone so they can kind of get that feedback in their brain. The other way is you can tie it back to the thing that they care about. So if I knew that someone in my team wanted to be a manager in the future, and that was part of their development plans, then when I'm giving them feedback, I could say, I thought it was amazing how well you listened and you reframed what the person was thinking. In the context of you being a manager, I think that's going to be a fantastic skill for you. I've made them care about the feedback that I'm giving them. So make the feedback as relevant as possible. So that's kind of my kind of tips for you on feedback. And the last thing I want to talk about is coaching as a skill set. Coaching has become, quite popular, quite popularized, and I think coaching is brilliant, really, really. I mean, I'm a trained coach, so I kind of would say it. But it is very, very helpful for unlocking people's thinking. But it isn't just the the skill of people with coaching qualifications. As managers, the research shows that the number one difference between a good manager and a great manager is their ability to coach their team members to be successful. Now, yes, you can have qualifications in coaching and all kinds of great stuff, and it is useful, but at its heart, the foundation of being a great coach, that is an ear, the foundation of being a great coach is the ability to listen and the ability to ask really good questions. If you compare those things together, you can effectively coach people. You might want to have a set of questions that really help you, and I'm going to give you some of those, but that is it at its heart. Creating the time to listen. Like, how often do we create the time to listen? There's a lady called Nancy Klein who has a whole coaching practice about time to think. Are you in a space where you can have the attention? Or, I've been in lots of businesses with glass meeting rooms where there's people walking past and your eyes are going all over the place. I mean, that's not active listening. You might think you're in the room, but you're being distracted by what's going on around you. So are you in a space where you can listen? Have you created the time? Are you giving that person your undivided attention? Is your phone on the side with notifications? I have also done that in the past. And have you got the really, really good open questions? As managers, it's very easy for us to leap in and solve. We're short of time, you've got lots of other things that you're doing. It's very easy to hear someone's problem and try and solve it. It feels great, it feels like we've added value, and we can move on and do the next thing that's on our to-do list that day. But ultimately, it's not helping the person to be that best, and it's not helping you to be the best manager. So, how can we make this practical? There is a very, very popular coaching framework called GROW. Hands up if people come across GROW before. Okay, probably about a quarter of you have. It's probably like the most common coaching framework. The S is the bit that really comes into play for managers. I want to talk about it. So I'm just going to say what the words are for this framework, and I'm going to talk about how you can use it in practice. So the G stands for goal. So when you're talking to the person in your team, you really want to get to, what is the problem here? What is the thing you're trying to solve? What outcome do you really want to get to? We've got to get clear on the problem. Sometimes people waffle for ages in one-to-ones, and you're like, what is the actual thing that we want to solve today? So you've got to get to the root of the problem, the opportunity, the goal that they want. The next thing that we need to get to is the reality. What's actually going on today? Then we want them, not us, to surface the options. What could you do? Anything else? What else have you thought about? What else have you done before? We want them to surface the options. The W sometimes gets called will and sometimes gets called way forward. So let me explain it. The will is, the way forward is normally the one I would go with. That's a bit like next steps, but I don't think it fits the model quite as well, so they call it will and way forward. But the way forward is, what do you think you're going to do next? What do you think the way forward from this situation is? You're basically going to get people to pick the options, and the will is all about how committed they are. So if I was just to kind of role model a conversation I might have with someone in my team, let's say they're coming to me and they're having a problem with a stakeholder and they're saying, Helen, I don't know what to do with the stakeholder, I'm trying to get some stuff, but I just don't seem to be making any traction with them. That's the kind of conversation they're coming to me with. Now I could just say, oh, do you want me to call them up and get it sorted? That would be me in efficient manager mode. It is not me in coaching mode. I'm not really helping them. What I would say instead, if I created the time for this conversation, is I would say, well, what's the real outcome that you want to get to? They might say it. Waffle on a bit, and I might say, okay, so you really want that person to agree to do the presentation with you in the board meeting, whatever it is. And then I would say, okay, so what's going on today? What have you tried? What are you experiencing from this person? What's the type of interaction that you're getting? How's that making you feel? Lots of big, open questions to try and get them to see what the reality of the situation is at the moment. Then I would say, okay, so what are your ideas for how you could approach this? This is the big, big area. That option area is the normal one where we fall into like manager solving trap. We just want them to surface the options. The most powerful question is like anything else. So they'll come up, I might say, oh, well, I could drop them an email and tell them I want to talk to them. Okay, what else could you do? Well, I could catch them at the end of that meeting. Okay, anything else? Well, I could speak to somebody that I know they really respect and see if they could get them on side. That's a great idea. Anything else? You want to keep getting them to surface all of the options. And the biggest bit here as well is the silence piece. It's so easy if they go, and then you say, oh, you could do this, or you move on. Like, the silence is where they will keep coming up with different ideas. So you want to surface loads of different ideas here, and then you want to say, what do you think will be the most effective thing for you to do next, which is your way forward, and then how committed are you to taking that action? You might say, yeah, I'm really committed. Brilliant. You have got them to solve their own problem. You have been a facilitator of their thinking. They will be far more committed to the outcome, and most of the time when I've done this, their ideas are way better than mine anyway. It's definitely worth building this as a muscle. Now this is the bit where you can be more action-orientated, and this is the bit that makes it different as a manager versus being an actual coach. This is the, how can I support you to do this? Don't ask that question until they've worked all this rest stuff out for themselves. This is the, what do you need me to do to help you? How can I support you? And that's where you can take on some actions. But don't take it on before then. You might think you're being helpful, but you're not helping them to be at their best and come up with the best ideas for their challenges. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely a way that you can empower. We talked about good managers empower. This is how you empower the people that work for you. So they are the three things that I think are most useful, most important for us to become growth mindset managers, much more like the managers, if I kind of just fly back over here a second, much more like these managers over here. If you're creating psychological safety, you've got really strong feedback cultures in your business, and you're operating as a coach, then you're available, you're giving them the time, you're supportive, you're helping them to be their best with feedback, you're empowering them, they trust you because you've created a safe space where they can be themselves. That is the key to unlocking being a growth mindset manager, helping your team to be at their best, and also for you to be the best manager in the business. I've gone through lots and lots there, and we're going to do a bit of a Q&A in a minute, so appreciate if people have got questions, I want to be able to answer them. But if there's anything after today, if you're thinking, Helen, I cannot find that rework model or that survey anywhere, and I would quite like to do it, this is how you can get in touch. So I'm just helen@amazingif.com. I'm very happy to send you these slides or whatever you need to help you to put this stuff into practice. Mission is genuinely to make work better for everyone, and if I can help you to take action, I want to. For you or your teams, we have a podcast in the business. It's called the Squiggly Careers Podcast. We've pretty much just reached 200,000 listeners of the podcast. We cover loads of different things. This week, has anyone come across Dame Stephanie Shirley? She's an amazing TED Talk about why ambitious women have got flat heads. She's 86, and she was like one of the first female tech entrepreneurs. She's inspiring. She was on our podcast this week, and then next week we've got a live podcast with lots and lots of different people. I also do a daily careers tip, which might be good inspiration for your team. It's like 3 minutes long, practical stuff that they can put into place on collaboration, connection, being themselves and being their best at work. That's Instagram, that's an Instagram picture, or if you're not on Instagram, at LinkedIn. I post them there every day. So there might be some things that might help you and some things that might help your team. That is everything that I wanted to share with you today. I hope it's interesting, I hope it's useful, and if you've got any questions, I think Marianne's going to field some of the Q&A. Thank you.